opening the autumn season at the Theatre Royal BSE St Edmunds is an in-house production of The Secret Garden, the fantastic children's classic. Now, that's been adapted for the stage by Nicola Werenowska, who is a playwright, but she's also a neurodivergent playwright as well. So we're going to explore a little bit about how that helps or hinders her in her playwriting. Good evening, Nikki.
Hi, good to be here.
Lovely to have you. Let's talk a bit about The Secret Garden to start with, because it is a children's classic, and there was many years ago, the BBC adaptation of it on children's TV, and then more recently there's been a film with Colin Firth. So you've adapted the story for stage. How did you go about, because when you have a book there's just so much there. It must have been as much about what you left out as what you kept in, wasn't it?
Yeah, there is so much there, and I read it several times, and the more you read it, the more you see. So we had to make some decisions. We haven't got all of the characters, but we've got all of the main ones. I do quite a lot of adaptation, actually, and for me it's always about finding the essence of the story and then trimming the text down. And for this adaptation, it's just been such a lovely process of kind of working out what works and what doesn't.
Do you enjoy, you say you do quite a lot of adaptation. Is that something you enjoy as a playwright, taking a well-known story and bringing it to the stage?
Yeah, I absolutely love it. In addition to the Secret Garden, I did a Radio 4 adaptation of Dickens' Little Dorrit, which we called Amy Dorrit, with a playwright called April de Angelis, and I'm currently adapting The Rainbow, D.H. Lawrence's The Rainbow, which I'm being supported for by the Mercury Theatre. Yeah, there is something about adapting something and making it your own, which I really, really like. Now, when did you kind of know that you wanted to be a playwright? Did you always want to be a playwright? Well, I always wanted to be a writer. I think when I was 7. So as long as I, as soon as I learned to write, basically, I loved telling stories. I guess at the beginning it was more stories and poems. I probably didn't know what a play was, but it's something that I always wanted to do. And I always say that I think it's part of the fabric of who I am. I love the power of storytelling, and I love the creative writing process. So when you were 16, you wrote your first full-length play, and it was runner-up in a very prestigious competition. Tell us about that. It was an incredible moment for me. I just remember so clearly standing on the steps of the Royal Court Theatre, and they'd done a rehearsed reading of my play, and I think that was the moment that I knew that I wanted to be a playwright. But unfortunately, at the time, so I have dyspraxia. As you mentioned, I'm neurodivergent. And at the time, I didn't know that. And my undiagnosed dyspraxia undermined my confidence to such a degree that I didn't feel I could be a playwright. There's something about being a playwright that perhaps is more exposing than other forms of writing. If you're a poet, you can hide away in your room, or a novelist. But theatre is a very collaborative process, and I really didn't feel that I could do that. So it took me another 16 years and a dyspraxia diagnosis before I finally started playwriting professionally. So this competition was the Royal Court Young Playwrights competition, so very prestigious. And you mentioned there you were standing on the steps of the Royal Court Theatre. Undiagnosed dyspraxia. Did the diagnosis not come then until you were in your early 30s? Until recently, women were seriously underdiagnosed with dyspraxia and other neurodivergent conditions. So at the point at which I was diagnosed, when I was 30, we thought the ratio was 4 to 1, as in boys to girls, of being neurodivergent. And, recent evidence tells us that it's 50-50, but it's that in the past we've been following a male model because all these conditions manifest differently in boys and girls, and also boys in a classroom situation this is generalising. But the boys in a classroom situation, if they're a bit unhappy, tend to make themselves known, whereas girls tend to sort of hide it and try and fit in and copy their peers. So it's absolutely fascinating. But I feel very lucky to have been diagnosed when I was, because I know lots of women, who now in their 40s and 50s who are only just getting diagnosed. So, yeah.
And was it a light bulb moment? Did it help with your playwriting when the diagnosis came? Did you, how did it make you feel?
It was a total light bulb moment, and, it kind of changed my life in a moment and forever. Because all those things that I thought I couldn't do, but I didn't know why, suddenly, I understood, and a lot of them weren't an issue anymore. For example, driving. I always felt undermined that I couldn't drive, and I tried to learn when I was 17, 18, and you just could never do it because of my coordination issues. And just how that made me feel, not knowing why. And then when I found out about my dyspraxia, it was like, well, okay, so I'm not going to drive. It doesn't matter. But it's just that understanding of why you can't do things and why you can't meet other people's expectations. So at school, I was told off quite a lot because I couldn't do certain things like, the usual things, shoelaces, catching a ball, all of those sort of, practical things.
Yeah.
And so I had to learn to sort of hide. And when I was diagnosed, suddenly I didn't have to hide anymore. So it was a really important moment. And in terms of playwriting, it gave me the confidence to think, well, I can do this then. And then shortly after my diagnosis, I joined the Mercury Theatre's playwriting group. And I was really lucky that there was a playwright with someone, I think someone dropped out of something. And then I was lucky enough to get my work commissioned within a few months of joining, and that was the start for me of a really successful and productive playwriting journey that I'm still on.
Fantastic. How important is it to you that you make your work accessible to all? We've talked about your diagnosis and not feeling like you had to hide certain things. So now that you have this voice, you have this platform, and you can write plays. Is it important to you to make theatre accessible to all?
Yeah, it's extremely important. I've worked on several occasions with Grey Eye Theatre. They're the leading disabled and neurodivergent theatre company in the UK. And I was a graduate of their Right to Play playwriting programme in 2013-14. And, working with Grey Eye has really opened my eyes to the need to create work that everyone can engage with. And in my own theatre practice, I do quite a lot of work with neurodivergent artists. So I often run workshops or one-to-one sessions for neurodivergent artists who are just starting out. I think things are changing and there is more awareness, but still there are more barriers to overcome if you're if you're an autistic actor, for example, who doesn't like to do improvisation or doesn't want to do anything social in audition process, those are sort of real barriers. For writers, for dyspraxic writers like me, the barriers are often to do with structure. So you might be, really good at writing your play, but you don't quite know how to organise your thoughts, or you don't know how to pitch, those sorts of things.
Yeah, it's not just the writing, is it? It's all the stuff that comes with it, like the marketing side of it. I mean, you mentioned with a poet, you can kind of write your poetry, maybe publish your book or your pamphlet of poetry, and you can remain almost anonymous. But with plays and theatre, it's a much more gregarious profession, isn't it? There's opening night,
that's a really good way of describing it. And there's a real pressure to be visible, and for disabled people and neurodivergent people, that's really difficult sometimes. You can't always be there in person, or you might not want to be there in person, or it might make you feel uncomfortable.
Is it a challenge for you, that?
No, I mean, I think one of the ways I cope with my undiagnosed disability was by being really social. So always by having lots of friends and people around me to support and help me. So the social side is fine. For me, the challenges are more, I suppose, around networking. I find social media really difficult.
Yeah.
That sort of aspect of marketing, largely because, as you may notice, I find it hard to be concise. So like Twitter is a nightmare for me.
Because you've only got a certain amount of characters.
Yeah, and you just and I find it hard to be sort of concise and short, and and to have a sort of clear focus.
We're going to be back with my half guest, Nikki, who is a playwright, neurodivergent, and she has adapted The Secret Garden for the Theatre Royal Bury St Edmunds. It will be their in-house production, their first one of the new autumn season, opening on the 19th of August.